manual from Flag Australia, and it's in the series Australians Take Back Your Country. And it's been an extraordinary week in Australia, and I just want to mention 6 matters, the first of which you can see a more detailed transcript about in Spectator Australia. Just go into www.spectator.com.au. I'm sorry, I'll repeat that again, www.spectatoraustralia.com.au. And the first thing I'd like to mention is the lockdown. We still have a lockdown. We have near hysteria in the government and the media about the number of cases, but never the mortality rate. And may I remind you, because nobody is reminding the politicians, or not many people are reminding the politicians, when they introduced the lockdown, which went against world's best practice established by Taiwan, when they introduced the lockdown, which has so damaged the economy, they said it was to flatten the curve so that the hospitals would be able to accept the enormous number of cases which were predicted to go into the hospitals. Well, those predictions were as empty as the previous predictions of those computer modelers. And instead of the lockdown meaning flattening the curve, they're now saying the lockdown means eradicating the virus. They haven't explained why we've jumped from one to the other. And scientists tell us we will not eradicate the virus until we have a vaccine. And terrible things are being done to the economy, and yet the government insists on this lockdown, which really is very much suspect. The second thing I wanted to mention is that the harvest. We're now learning that the harvest, which begins in September, this is the harvest of the food, of the vegetables and fruit Australians will eat and will expect to be there in the supermarkets. There's an enormous shortage of labour. Although we have probably about 2 or 3 million people on Job Seeker and Job Keeper and all these devices, and a large number of people not working on Job Seeker, some of them long term, there's not sufficient labour, apparently, to bring in the harvest. This is because the backpackers are leaving Australia and they're not coming in. They're leaving Australia, they're not being replaced. The reason why we have to have the backpackers is that those who are long-term unemployed, who are able-bodied, think this work apparently is beneath them, and they won't do it, and the government tolerates this. This is an appalling situation, and it looks as though we're going to be in a terrible position where if we don't get the labour, that is the 40,000 needed, starting in the north in September and moving down, if they don't get them, then the fresh food, the vegetables and the fruit won't come to the supermarkets of Australia, and if they do come, or what comes, will be very expensive indeed. The third matter I want to mention, and it testifies, I think, completely to the incompetence of the administration of the governments of Australia. Remember the NBN. You probably have had problems with it as I have had. The NBN, which was introduced by Kevin Rudd and Stephen Conroy, something which I think should have been done by the private sector. They decided alone in the world it would be done by the public sector. And when the Liberals got in, Turnbull insisted that it still continue as a public project. That has cost 60 billion. That 60 billion was done by a rort. It's off budget. It's not included in the budget. It's not included in the deficit, because the argument is, oh well, this money will be recovered when we sell this. We put in 60 billion, and the latest valuation is that it's worth about 8 billion. And why is it worth about 8 billion? Part of it is the inefficiencies of the NBN, but a big part is the politicians thought they knew what the technology was. The fact is the world is jumping the technology of landlines, and they're going to Wi-Fi. And a large number of people, you included, Peter, don't have a landline, and why should they? Mobiles work well. So a large number of people are going to mobiles. Had they left it to the private sector, they would have worked out what to do. The government insisted on the NBN. They did it off budget, which was a rort. They won't sell it in this term because they say it's not on their agenda. They won't sell it this term because it'll only be sold for something like 8 billion or probably less. And they'll have to show an enormous loss, which will only go to the other substantial expenditures of the government. Off budget is a trick. And the fourth matter I want to mention is the Whitlam matter relating to the palace letters. Everybody knew, everybody serious, every serious observer, including Gough Whitlam, knew the Queen was not involved. And yet the Australian Republican movement argued she was, and overturned a federal court decision over 2 federal courts and got it into the High Court, all costing an enormous amount of public money. I've written a piece for Spectator. You'll be able to see it after Thursday on their website, spectatoraustralia.com.au. And in it, I quote Mr. Whitlam. Mr. Whitlam supporting in 1970, not the first attempt by Labor to block supply. Remember, the Liberals blocked supply twice, and they were attacked over that, and I think in many ways rightly so. But Labor had tried to block supply 170 times. And Mr. Whitlam was speaking in support of the 170th time. Senator Murphy in the Senate tabled a list of the 169 cases on which they tried to block supply. And Mr. Whitlam said, when you block supply and supply is blocked, the government must go to an election and put its agenda to the people. So Mr. Whitlam, speaking in 1970, argued that what should happen when supply is blocked is exactly what John Kerr finally forced the country to. He handed it over to the people. The sixth matter I want to mention is about the ban of all live cattle years ago by Minister Ludwig in the Gillard government. He could have had a minimal ban, excluding those cattle being sent to abattoirs which everybody knew were safe and secure and where they'd be treated properly. But instead he banned all cattle exports. He seriously damaged an enormous number of people in the pastoral industry, including Indigenous people, the workers, the station owners, the people in transport. Vast numbers of people were damaged, seriously damaged. They sued in a class action in the federal court. A judge, Justice Suarez, decided that this was a serious breach of the law. This was an excessive use of the minister's powers. He had committed misfeasance in public office, and he awarded damages. And now there's enormous pressure on the government not to appeal the decision, not to put the farmers through this. The government yet hasn't made a decision. And finally, the Nationals in the government have reacted. They've decided they'd better try to protect the farmers. And the Nationals and One Nation are arguing that the government must not appeal the decision. So those are the 6 matters which I think demonstrate that we are severely tested in relation to having good government in this country. I just raised those issues, and many of them are in Spectator Australia. And now, Peter, you have something to tell us, I believe, about your experiences.
Well, I'll talk about some of those that you've mentioned, David. The lockdown, we can't keep that going forever. We've got to get back to business. Too many people are hurting. Too many people have been destroyed. And I've said in the past, how many people have caught influenza, have died because of influenza. Imagine if we had that shoved down our necks day in, day out. I'm just getting sick and tired. I don't call it COVID-19. I'm like you, the Chinese virus out of Wuhan. And we've mentioned this many, many times. I speak to a lot of people, David. They're over it. They're sick of it. You go into a cafe or go into a shop, and first thing people are doing is looking on the ground. They don't know where to stand. They don't know what to do. They can't think for themselves. Absolutely ridiculous. In regards to our harvesting, very good point. What have we got? Job seeker, job keeper. What about job finding? What about finding jobs for these people on welfare that aren't looking for a job? They're getting too well paid now to stay at home, which is ridiculous. We're not going to have the right amount of food on our tables. The farmers, the mum and dad farmers, have been through hell and back with fire, flood, drought, government regulation, green and red tape, draconian laws, water being stolen off them, fuel, that's another thing. Fuel, are we going to run out of fuel? We've only got about 28 days of fuel left in this country at any one time. You got to look at this and think, what the hell's going on here? I mean, these politicians are letting us down badly. They all eat. They're all doing pretty good. I watch these politicians, and the minute they get into politics and they're on the gravy train, the kilos start going on. Not all of them, but quite a few of them. It's just ridiculous, David. I just can't understand it. So, maybe these people on welfare should be told, well, you've got to get out and you've got to start picking some fruit and veggies and on-farm work if they're capable. There's a lot of young ones on welfare that could be capable. I know my old back's just about had it, and I'm feeling it these days, but you still go out there and you still do the job. So a lot of these young ones on the dole that I see walking around my hometown of Strathalbyn are a hell of a lot fitter than what I am. So maybe we could build some self-esteem with these young people, and they might start to feel good about themselves once they got out there in the workforce and actually earned their money instead of stuck home in an environment where they're just got nothing to do. It's not good for mental health. There's nothing better than getting out, mixing with people, and earning your money, feeling good about yourself. I think we need some big change, David. I really do. And NBN, what did you say? 60 million? 60 billion?
60 billion.
And they want to sell it for what, 8.7 billion?
Well, yes, and they won't sell it, Peter, because they know it'll be a great embarrassment. That's not for this term, you see. They'll sell it in the next term. But remember this, it's off budget. That doesn't come off the budget yet. They will have to bring it off the budget. This should not be allowed, should it?
We're talking $50 billion difference there. Who's paid for this NBN? Who's paid for this NBN?
You did.
Oh,
the taxpayers.
Oh, pretty easy to, do what you like with other people's money. No, absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous, David. I'm just wondering, do you mind if we just take a break for a minute?
Certainly, and I think we might bring this to an end now, and we'll come back for another session very soon. So
yeah,
thank you very much.
Sure.
And this is part of Australians Take Back Your Country.
Yeah,
Thank
for
you.
sure.
Right.
Thanks very much, David.